since 1966.
This is NBC4's News Conference with Conan Nolan, Southern California's longest-running public affairs program.
On this edition of News Conference, the California Legislature, in one of its most consequential sessions in years, passes expanded childhood vaccination rules, statewide rent control, and a dramatic new shift in employment law as organized labor wins a key battle against Uber, Lyft, and other tech companies whose non-union workforce will now be considered employees with full benefits and no longer independent contractors. Which industries received exemptions, and how much of this will end up on the ballot next year, with the losers in the legislative debate appealing directly to voters. We talk with Jon Myers, the Sacramento bureau chief for the Los Angeles Times. And sizing up the Democratic Party race for president after the third debate, do we now see a pattern? Is it going to be Biden, Bernie, and Warren down the wire to Iowa? And who, if any, of the second-tier candidates can take advantage if support for the frontrunner starts to fade? We talk with veteran political consultants Mike Murphy and Bill Carrick. Good morning and welcome to the Tom Brokaw News Center here at Universal City. I'm Conan Nolan. It was a remarkable week in Sacramento at the end of the California State Legislative Session with bills regarding rent control as well as vaccinations. And, of course, a landmark piece of legislation which essentially changes the definition of work in California and may have ramifications nationally. It was called Assembly Bill 5, and it for many industries, eliminates those individuals who were independent contractors, making them employees. Jon Myers is the bureau chief for the Los Angeles Times in Sacramento. He joins us now to help sort this out. Jon, thanks for taking the time.
Happy to do it, Conan.
So, Assembly Bill 5, this, I understand, was in part a response to a California Supreme Court decision that said if you have employees who are central to your company, to your mission as a business, you can't use them as independent contractors. You have to make them employees, pay the minimum wage, pay workers' compensation fees, pay payroll taxes. Do I have that right?
I think so. I mean, I'm certainly not a lawyer, so I won't try to figure out every legal nuance. But I think the takeaway for this is we all know, just in life, that we are having a very large discussion about the meaning of work and the future of what it means to work. And we know a lot of industries have moved to where these are not full-time or even part-time with benefits jobs, that these are freelancing, independent contractor kind of jobs. And this Supreme Court ruling suggested that the practice in California businesses had gone too far and rolled it back. And what AB 5, the Assembly bill that you're talking about, sought to do was codify that Supreme Court ruling, although I would also say it changed it in some ways because it wanted to put in statute what it means about these tests of who should be and who isn't a full-time employee, so to speak.
How much of this was driven by the California Federation of Labor? We saw they were active in the rallies for this, and even the Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez from San Diego, who authored the legislation, talked about the importance of being able to unionize Uber and Lyft drivers as an example.
Yeah, well, the Uber and Lyft part, which we can come to in a moment, which has become the source of a lot of the political fighting, is only part of it, of course. There's so many jobs that we're talking about that are impacted here. But labor saw this as a major fight. And, you know, and honestly, Colin, as we know, this is the fight between business and labor that is so similar to a lot of the other ones. Business insists that it needs the flexibility. Labor insists that the rights of workers need to be respected and that people are not able to, take care of their health benefits or other needs they have. And they also will point out, of course, labor's side is that there's a cost to the entire state for health care services and other services that aren't provided by these businesses. This was a big business labor fight. Labor was all in on it. And I will tell you, I think that most people think that labor largely won out of this battle.
What are the chances that Uber and Lyft are going to go to the ballot next year in order to reverse this?
Well, they sure look like it. They have put $90 million in a ballot measure committee. They say they want to run a ballot measure in 2020, go gather voter signatures. We don't know what that ballot measure looks like. We haven't seen any language. We don't know if it will seek to overturn AB 5, and that's assuming the governor signs it, and the governor has said he'll sign it. We don't know if it's that. We don't know if it's a carve-out exemption for their industries. We don't know, but $90 million gets a lot of people's attention. I mean, just by context for people who are watching this, the largest ballot fights in California history have been somewhere on the magnitude of about $100 million. So putting $90 $90 million in a bank is a big deal. And now the question becomes, what do they want? What do they push? And maybe more importantly here for the legislature, which of course has adjourned, as it adjourned on Friday, what does the legislature do next year to come back and keep talking about this issue to maybe get Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash, I think that's the third company, to back off of that ballot threat?
And some industries were able to get carve-outs. That is, it's not going to impact them, or it will be delayed. Do we have an example?
Yeah, there are several examples. And what's interesting here is I think there were some critics, even on the Democratic side of the aisle here in Sacramento, who said, this isn't the way to do this. We shouldn't go industry by industry and say, you're in, you're out, you're in, you're out. But if you look at some of the exemptions, doctors, dentists, realtors, graphic designers, there is a one-year exemption, I should say, for full disclosure, for newspaper carriers that has been talked about, that was part of this negotiated deal. So there's a lot in there, and I think the question becomes, do more industries want this looked at next year when the legislature returns? Does the legislature have appetite for that? And that gets back to that ballot fight. If Uber, Lyft, and these other companies are threatening to go to the ballot, don't they have a little bit of leverage to make the legislature say, hey, more people should be exempt?
Let's talk about another piece of legislation, landmark as well, rent control. We now have it sort of statewide, at least the opportunity for municipalities to adopt a rent control. There's some suggestion that the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, Michael Weinstein, an individual who's well known in political circles for essentially bankrolling lots of different ballot measures, they want to go to a ballot with an even stricter rent control measure next year. Was the bill that was passed designed to help rob oxygen from that effort? I
think so. I think you're exactly on it there. I mean, if you look at what was passed, it is not as far as people like Mr. Weinstein wants to go. It provides rent relief in more places across California than have it now. It'll provide more relief in the Los Angeles area than exists now. But it is not pure rent control from the backers of that. As a matter of fact, it's not even branded that. In the legislature, it was called a rent cap because they didn't want to call it rent control because that became another bit of the political football. But the Apartments Association, the California Apartments Association in particular, backed this bill that the governor says he'll sign on the rent cap, in part, I think, to try to kind of say, look, we've done something in Sacramento. There's no reason to vote for this ballot measure in 2020. That was a big fight in 2018. So far, the backers of that ballot measure said, so what? We're going to go to the ballot again.
I should point out that the law that was passed that the governor signed is a 5% rent hike on top of the consumer price index, that is inflation. And of course, as you just pointed out, the Weinstein campaign says that's not good enough.
Yeah, they wanted more.
Right. And finally, there was a tremendous amount of dust up in Sacramento, the state capitol. A lot of people don't appreciate just the ferocity of opposition to the measure over vaccinations. Senator Pan, who we had on this program recently, the one that essentially makes it more difficult for you to exempt your child in getting a vaccination. It's been passed. The governor's going to sign it. The fact is, though, does that end it, or are we going to see a legal challenge?
Well, and the governor has signed it, right? I mean, there was a very quick signature. We didn't see him sign it, but we certainly were told he would sign it. This has been intense. I will just say, by way of context, I've been covering state capitol for about the last 18 years. I've never seen that many people show up, that angry, that motivated inside the halls of the state capitol, protesting, yelling, screaming. Two things I think we're going to look for. I don't know about a legal challenge, but the critics of vaccines, so the opponents of this crackdown, and again, these are vaccine exemptions for school children, have filed a referendum measure. As a matter of fact, they filed two because there are two bills that Newsom signed. So they want to overturn it at the ballot. That's going to be tough. They've got to probably spend a few $1 million to get signatures very, very quickly. That's not easy to do. But I don't think we've heard the last of this discussion. I think in the public course, I think people will continue to talk about it. And the real question, if I can say, comes what happens when state officials start reviewing the vaccine exemptions as allowed under this law. The Department of Public Health, the State Medical Board. We're going to hear a lot more about this. I don't know how representative the groups that protested in Sacramento are of the larger California public. Polling suggests they are not representative. But I think this has been a passionate issue about the role of government, the role of children, the role of families in looking at their children. I don't think we've heard the last of it.
Jon Myers, the bureau chief for the Los Angeles Times in Sacramento. Jon, you're the best. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, Conan.
Up next, we take the measure of the last presidential debate from two very bright minds of the political circles, Bill Kerrick and Mike Murphy, when we return.